Welcome to Celebrating Our Food and Telling Stories of It. I am Sophie, your host and producer, and this is Our Food Stories, the podcast for us and by us. Episode 20. For the final episode of Season 2, we are having a crash course on making Enturire, a sorghum brew. Special guest Owen Singura walks us through the traditional method of making this delicious drink, its variations, and even the type of water used to create a unique flavor and taste. This is like sitting in a science and history class on how to produce beer. You will learn a lot. I certainly did. Now, without wasting any more time,
if you are familiar or closer to the Banyachigezi, by now we should know what Enturire is and what it means for our culture. Enturire is a drink made from sorghum and honey. Growing up at home, we used to make it. My grandfather and my father, they taught me the art. They actually taught everyone at home. It is a special drink that you give to guests, serve at parties, at special events. Yeah, it comes with energy, just like it sounds. The sorghum and honey makes it more nutritious and rich. We actually regard it as food, not just a drink. The process of making Enturire is almost the same as that of beer, with some differences. But it is made in 4 major steps. One is Okutorana and Okwera. You're sorting and winnowing the sorghum. Now, growing up, there were sorghum varieties that we knew made the best Ushera. It made the best Enturire. Later on, I will explain the difference between Ushera and Otoko and Enturire. So the most outstanding sorghum variety is Chatanombe. Right now, it's dying out. But when you go in Kabale and ask a sorghum variety called Chatanombe, you can find it, but very few people have it right now. So you sort or winnow your Chatanombe to remove the extraneous matter, the stones, the chaff, and everything that is not sorghum. After that, you float the sorghum. The reason for floating is that you want to make sure that you're starting with a whole grain sorghum. The weak, lighter ones will float, throw them away. What sinks down is the real grain, full grain sorghum, and that's what we proceed with. After sorting, the second step is Okwinika. Okwinika in the commercial beer production is what we call malting. Now, unlike in the commercial beer production where they use different processes and advanced processes and chemicals, sometimes traditionally our grandparents taught us that you can use ash. So we used to get wood ash, specifically wood ash, mix it in our sorghum. That is after we've kutorana, after sorting, we mix it in the sorghum. Ash is an antibiotic, but also ash helps reduce tannins. Tannins are what bring out the astringent taste. If you've ever eaten sorghum before malting, the fresh sorghum from the field, you realize it has that astringency. We call it okambira. It tastes different on your tongue, unlike the malted sorghum. So ash helps removing that. But another important reason for malting is you want to convert the starch into sugars, because yeast does not ferment starch. It's crazy how our parents and grandparents knew all this science. First, they knew that you add ash. Ash is an antibiotic. It will kill the other harmful bacteria. It will also reduce on the tannins, which reduces on the bitter taste. But ash also weakens the cell walls, so it makes it easy for the conversion of starch to reducing sugars, the sweet sugars. Now, after mixing the ash into the sorghum at home, I come from Kabarole, what most people call Fort Portal, but now it's a new district. I come from a town called Rimi. Now, if you're familiar with the Rwenzori sub-region, is that there are many snow-capped rivers. These rivers flow from the top, from the glaciers of Mount Rwenzori. So we used to carry our sorghum, move it to the river. There was a small there is a small stream called Intabago in Rimi, if you're familiar with Rimi town. So keep it in Intabago for overnight. In the morning, we carry it. Why are we soaking it for overnight? With ash, first it is to facilitate the process, and also the water in that stream gave it a distinct flavor, and it's the same water we used to use for malting, specifically. For malting, it gave it a signature taste that I will explain later. The next day, we carry the sorghum from the river, take it home, rinse it to remove the extra ash, and also to remove the harmful bacteria that could be in the water. You rinse it with clean and safe water. After that, you cover the sorghum. We are still in the process of malting. We could cover the sorghum, spread it, cover it, and allow it to germinate partially. Germinate, but not allow it to bring the leaves, partial germination. Now, during the process of partial germination, it's when the starch gets converted to sugars. After 2 days, it's all heated up, it's germinating. We remove it, take it outside, and dry it up to a moisture content of 15%. Of course, we didn't have moisture meters, but we could test with the mouth, also test with the hands. And this is what I used to enjoy, because at this moment, the malted sorghum is really sweet. Remember the starch? It has now been converted to sugars, and we could eat it as a snack. We could even carry it to school. It was really fun. So the next step is Okutera. Okutera, now we are making the porridge. In now commercial beer production, we call it mashing. You've dried your sorghum, we could take it to the mill. But way back, our grandparents and the older generation, they used to do okusa. Okusa is grinding the malted sorghum on orubengo. It was work mostly done by young people, the children and women. So, but now we use grinding, we use mills. So we take it to the mill to get the flour. Now the flour is what we use in mashing or okutera.
Sorry for interrupting your listening, but I wanted to let you know of a few things. I had an interview a few months back with a fellow food storyteller, and I talked about how this podcast means so much to me because, in a way, we as Ugandans get to learn more about our fellow countrymen, something that we have sadly not had access to through our formal education system. And so, with each story that is contributed and shared, we learn something new about ourselves, which was the goal of this podcast to begin with. And the fact that you are listening means that that goal has been achieved. Season 2 is coming to an end. I love the stories that have been shared, and the fact that you're listening means you have enjoyed them too. So, to continue this podcast and to prepare for Season 3, I am kindly requesting that you do these 2 things. Leave a comment, a like, a review, or a rating wherever you are listening from. If you are listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, it will be great to leave a 5-star review for us so that these stories can reach more listeners like yourself. Secondly, if you are a Ugandan or you know someone that has an interesting food story to share and they would like to contribute to this podcast, send them this podcast or send me an email at akitcheninuganda@gmail.com or a DM on Instagram or Twitter at akitcheninuganda. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story.
Now, there are 2 ways of okutera obushera. One is you dissolve the flour in cold water, then boil it. The next is you get the flour and add hot boiling water. If you have studied in Western Uganda or you've seen guys mostly from the West, we used to do what we call it sianga, where you get hot water from the kettle, add it on millet flour, and then you bang it. It's what we call it sianga. Now, I studied at Chigezi High School. We used to have what we call a chigusha. A chigusha is you have the malted sorghum flour, you add hot water, and boom, There you have your Echigusha. It's like Etsianga, but Tsianga is for porridge. Echigusha is from malted sorghum. Etsianga is from millet flour. And the advantage of Etsianga is that you don't need to add sugar because it's already sweet. And that's why I used to love it so much. Now, we've made our Etsianga, or in growing up we used to call it Echanga, because my father at home we were taught the method of adding hot water to the flour. So you leave Echanga to cool to about 40 degrees. Leave it for about 4 hours. The reason for leaving it to cool is because the fermentation process, you're going to add yeast, and you want it to be gradual. You need to have yeast and also the other beneficial yeast, so you don't need to shock them with heat. So that's why you could leave it to cool, then add cold water, safe drinking cold water. Remember I told you we used to do malting from the river in Tobago? Now the water we use for diluting the changa is not from Tobago, it's from River Ruimi. And essentially our town is called Ruimi Town. So there's a big river also from Mount Renzori, snow-capped mountain. It's called Ruimi. Very fresh water, very clear water. So we could get it, boil it, and use it to dilute our changa. And this is how it becomes interesting, because if you don't boil it and add chlorine, sometime somebody approached my father and told him, old man, you're using a lot of energy and resources boiling this water. Why don't you use water guard? It is essentially chlorine. We tried it, but chlorine has its own taste, which ends up spoiling the whole craft and the taste of bushera. It makes it artificial, You know how chlorine tastes. So we could boil our water, use it to dilute Echanga. In beer production, it's what they call slurry. Now, the next stage is fermenting, or okweng. But after you've diluted the Echanga and leave it overnight, then you've made obushera or butoko, the sweet bushera. This is the bushera, could be reserved for kids, for women, for people who don't drink alcohol. And by the way, the real true bushera, you don't need to add sugar. If you add sugar, then there's something wrong, or you're covering up from something that went wrong during the process, or you don't know what you're doing, or you use the wrong sorghum. But the true Chata Nombe sorghum variety, you don't need to add sugar. It's abundant with sugars if you've done your thing right. The next morning you have obushera butoko, but now we want to ferment it. We want to, the sugars now to be converted to alcohol. So in commercial beer production, they use artificial yeasts. Not artificial yeast, but they already have pure cultures. But our great-grandparents knew how to go about this. They could get a brew from the previous week and they add it to the obushera butoko. Now that brew contains yeast, and actually the most abundant yeast one of the most abundant yeasts in Enturire is Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's the same yeast that is used in beer, plus other yeasts. So introducing the older brew to the new brew, to the obushera butoko, it now brings the yeast, introduces the yeast. You wait for 2 to 3 days, the obushera butoko has started fermenting and the ethanol is building up, the alcohol is building up. Then after 2 or 3 days, you add honey. The reason for adding honey is, one, it's the signature ingredient that gives this Enturire a very distinct taste. 2, honey facilitates secondary fermentation. My father used to call it okwimsia. First, it is making the Enturire sweet, and later it is now catalyzing a very rapid fermentation process. The next day, you have Enturire. Now, after that, it is serving. But before serving, my father used to have a group of people he used to work with. These were professional testers. Every morning, because we used to do this for money, we used to serve to people, to parties, distribute. He needed to ensure that the quality is the same. It's high quality, but the same today, tomorrow, and everywhere you go. So that's why people who, if you are in Rimi or Renzori sub-region and ask about Misabiro, almost everyone knew who Misabiro is because of the bushera. It was the same If you taste Misabiro's bushera in Kasese, in Kamwenge, or Fupoto Town, it's the same. And people didn't know what was behind. What was behind was a strict quality control process. Every morning, a panel of 2 or 3 people could come and test all the batches, all the barrels, and they awarded marks. They said, this is good, this is acceptable, unacceptable, or very good. These were guys who were good at their craft, and they like the wine snobs, like the coffee cuppers, like the beer testers. So every morning at 6 o'clock, they could come, test the batches, then say, this is good. Sometimes it could be bad, sometimes it could be good, but of course, most times it was good. Then they approve the batches for serving. Of course, there's people who had special orders. They say they want to make theirs stronger. So you add more honey after 2 days, or to double the alcohol, the alcohol percentage. The next will be Okugabura. We used to run a bar and a distribution point in Rimi. So on the weekends, on the holidays, I used to part-time there. Traditionally, Enturire is served in Orushare. Orushare is a calabash that has been cut into half, and also Orushete, the traditional straws. The best Enturire, how you could tell the best Enturire is after people have drunk and the men start dancing and chanting and they're ordering for more. That's how you could know that what you did was right. I'm talking about the Wachiga and Enturire, and I'm saying I'm from Rwenzori sub-region. Yeah, my grandparents shifted from Kabale during the 1946 Wachiga resettlement scheme that was spearheaded by Paul Ngorogoza. And one of the things that Ngorogoza cautioned them, told the Wachiga at that time, he actually wrote it in his book of Chigezi n'abantu bamuwo, Chigezi and its people. You can look it up in the libraries. It's a very good book, especially if you want to know about the history of Chigezi and the people of Chigezi. So I quote, he said, I would, in writing this, like to remind the settlers that even if they become rich and change their mother tongue, they should remember the proverb that even the hot water eventually cools. They must never forget the good customs and the characteristic of the Wachiga, nor forget their language, and they must feel in their bones that they are Wachiga, remembering where they used to live. So with this caution, my grandparents carried it at heart. And that's why everywhere you see a Wachiga community, you look around closely, you're going to see Enturire. Just ask for Enturire. Everywhere you see a Wachiga community, ask for Enturire. We carry the food, we carry the language. Even if the language dies, but at least we carry the food. Even if I'm not in the country, part of the things I pack is sorghum, is malted sorghum flour. And when I feel I need something that reminds me of home, I make myself Enturire. Of course, the honey here is not the same as the honey in Kavale, but the honey, I'm currently in Israel, the honey is different, but because I have my original Chatanombe sorghum flour, I use whatever honey I can, then make myself Enturire. It's something that is closest to my heart, closest to my family, and it is a drink that everyone must try in their lifetime. I hope this motivates you to go and look for Enturire or Hage Mchiga everywhere you go.
Thank you, Owen, for that detailed recollection of making Enturire. After all this history, I hope that we appreciate each and every cup of bushera and Enturire that we consume. Also, let us know what part of this story that you enjoyed the most by leaving a comment wherever you listen. Owen is an agricultural research professional, and just like he mentioned in the story, his family is well known for brewing Enturire in Unyangabu district. Although the business no longer exists and his father has retired, you can keep up with his great work by following him on Twitter at Owen Singura. I will leave the Twitter handle in the episode notes. Remember, if you have a delicious food story that you would like to share, you can reach out to me via email at akitcheninuganda@gmail.com or on Instagram at akitcheninuganda. Don't forget to share the podcast with others, to leave a review or a rating, and to comment on your favorite stories wherever you listen. Doing so helps us push these stories to even more listeners. See you in the next episode.